we have such large companies now like ONE FC International, and then we have also other companies domestically like World Series of Fighting and Bellator. So what are your thoughts on there being multiple big-time MMA promotions, like, being almost the Super Bowl? Like, do you think there should be only one major company, like the UFC, that has all the best in the world in one spot? Or should there be several very large companies like the UFC, World Series of Fighting, and Bellator, where they're all kind of competing with each other? What do you think is better for the sport and the business?
Well, I think in general, a marketplace always benefits from competition. I think the fans benefit when there's multiple product, whether it's you're selling earth shoes, sports cars, or sports. So I think in general, it's a healthy thing. I'll be at the Bellator show on the 25th of this month in Temecula. In fact, I'll be interviewed there. I'll be with Scott Coker and Kevin Kay, the president of Spike. And they're, of course, they have an equity partner in Viacom. So Bellator has made a strong run at becoming the number 2 brand. The other brands that you mentioned are coming up also. I think that in general, a marketplace benefits from competition. So I'm not threatened or uncomfortable as the guy who created the original UFC, but there are other brands coming up. I think that we're going to see a lot of companies emerge in the next 20 years. Some fall by the wayside again. When I was a kid, General Motors was the big automobile company, and they're not as big as they used to be. And brands like Toyota and Honda and Volkswagen worldwide have made a real inroads into what General Motors used to do. Is it possible that the UFC could be supplanted as the number 1 brand 15 or 20 years from today? Anything's possible. I think that the growth of this sport is just beginning. I think the sport is just beginning, and I think that if I live long enough to see the next 20 years, I think I will be pleased and stunned by what will happen. I really do.
All right, now I've got a question also about some more modern mixed martial arts stuff here, and that would be about TRT and steroid use. 'Cause there's been a lot of that happening in the past few years in the sport. A lot of people are being caught using PEDs. So I wanted to ask what you guys did back when you were running the company in regards to drug testing, and was there a problem with steroids back in the day?
I'm always proud of the fact, and I talk about it in chapter 11 in the book, that I was the first promoter that I knew about in the United States, including boxing, that did age testing. I did age testing for UFC 1, and the fighters were all shocked. I remember Pat Smith said, "What do I need that for?" I said, "Well, that's what we're doing. That's what we have to do." But I later added hepatitis B and C to that list of things that we were doing. But the issue of drugs was not one that we got into in the 18 UFCs that I worked on. I knew it was an issue. In fact, I remember Frank Abbott joking about the fact that Ken Shamrock was the world's biggest 170-pound man. And that, that some of my fighters were taking human growth hormone. And you could see that from the development of their brow ridges or a split between their upper incisors. So early on, there was a concern about it. It is still a major concern, obviously, and many sports today, including bicycle racing and baseball, are all now concerned with this issue and how to regulate it, how to monitor it, and how to screen for it, and the masking agents that can be used and the techniques that can be used to conceal it. It's a big problem. We were just on the beginning of that issue, and in a sense, it really got wings later on. But I saw evidence of it early. Yes.
Okay. Now I also have just one last thing now, related to, I guess, the well-being of fighters, we'll call it. There's been a lot of talk for several years about starting fighters unions. Many different fighters have stepped up to talk about it and say they want to start one. Nothing's happened yet with it, but with the way fighters live their lives, and I'm going to use Gary Goodridge as an example because he's a fighter that fought for you back in early UFCs, who now has CTE, and he would definitely benefit from having health insurance within a fighters union or having better representation. Do you have an opinion on if fighters should unionize? Should there be a fighters union?
Well, I think the question of whether there should be a fighters union is different than the question of whether there can be a fighters union. I think that one of the difficulties that fighters will have in forming a union is that it's an individual sport. The type of personality that's drawn to it is iconoclastic and individualistic, and it's tough for them to be a joiner. Would fighters benefit from it? In many ways they would, because the benefits of unionization in other industries certainly has a historical precedence. But whether or not there will be an organization that can bring everyone together, It would have to be led by some Hall of Fame fighters, I think, that look out and see that this should be done and that they should, provide a rallying point for fighters. I'm sure promoters will not be happy with it because it will have a tendency to change maybe the purses and the price structure of fighters and fighting. But to answer your question directly, should there be one? If I were a fighter, I could see the value of it. As a promoter, I can also see that it can be an impediment. So I myself can put on two separate hats and look at the issue. I think a bigger picture has to take into account whether or not fighters will be able to organize. There was talk of it in boxing since I was a boy, and long before anyone my age group even considered it. There's been talk about a union for boxing going back to the 1930s when the Wagner Act was passed and changed the unionization in the United States to have the government look at unionization and have the big corporations look at it. So, whether or not you could get boxers or MMA fighters to unionize, that's a tough question.
All right, I mean, just looking forward, I'm hoping, like you mentioned, the next 20 years of the sport. I keep hoping that something happens in the next 20 years also, just for the safety of these fighters once they do hang up the gloves, so that we don't have more guys who are like Gary Goodridge, unfortunately, who fought longer than they should have and suffered a lot of unfortunate trauma to their brain.
This was an ongoing discussion I had with Bob Morowitz that precipitated an argument we had, in which I thought it was a mistake to be able to stand up and tell people that this was intrinsically safer than boxing, and that the implication was that nobody could really get injured. Look, it's a full contact sport. There's gloves involved. There's pushing involved. There's being dropped on your neck on the canvas. There's suplexes. This is a rough contact sport, and people do get injured, and there can be long-term issues. And certainly today, even racing, NASCAR has been studying the effects of what their sport has on fighters' mental and physical health. And I read a recent article in Road and Track that NASCAR is mandating safety changes to the equipment and to the cars, so that they're trying to deal with these issues of brain trauma and the kind of G-forces that can be generated in that type of an auto race. So, everyone is also looking at the settlement that the NFL had to make with some 4,000 athletes. I think was it almost $1 billion? 800 million? So everyone is looking at that and saying to themselves, if we have a sport that has a great deal of contact and there's a potential for cerebral trauma or injury, what are the implications? What are the legal implications? What are the ethical implications? So I think all of this today is going to continue to be an ongoing discussion. And ultimately, if I were a fighter, if I had a son who was fighting today, I'd be interested in safety and I'd be interested in insurance. That's a good question to ask Randy Couture, whose son is being signed. I believe will be joining Bellator very soon. I'm going to see Randy on Friday. I'll have to ask Randy about this.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Randy. I think Randy was one of the guys that was initially behind that as well, behind that idea of unionizing.
Yeah, and Randy, by the way, gave me a great testimonial for the book, Is This Legal? Randy was a great guy to deal with, one of my favorite fighters, one of the great prototypes for the modern UFC fighter, in that he knew how to cross-train, he knew how to add skills, he had great cardio, he knew how to cut weight, he knew how to add weight, also a great guy to do business with. And charismatic, I still see him in movies. He's going to be in the new Expendable film. Got a new TV show, I believe, coming out on Spike called Gym Rescue. I believe August 10th, I think is the premiere for that. He's got a couple. He's with Frank Shamrock, another guy with great charisma, great skills, another Hall of Famer. So the issue of a union, though, for fighters is an important one, and I think that it would take someone on the level of a Randy Couture to lead the way and make that happen.
All right, well, we've been talking for the last hour about Art Davie's new book, Art Davie and Sean Wheelock's new book, I should say, which is This Legal? The Inside Story of the First UFC from the Man Who Created It. So, Mr. Davie, I have now the most important question for you, and that's, is there going to be a follow-up book about other events? Because we've been talking for the last hour about all sorts of different UFC events, and I'd love to see a sequel that gives us more information about the rest of your time in the company.
Well, I've been asked about that, and I would urge fans, if they help make this book, Is This Legal, successful, and you can just buy it readily on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. If this book becomes successful, I foresee that I'll be sitting down at my computer again, working on a sequel. There are certainly a lot of stories from UFC 2 onto UFC Japan that I could tell that I think the fans might find of interest. So I want to thank everyone who's bought the book already, who plans to buy the book. It's been a pleasure, and I really enjoyed this interview today, Matthew.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Davie. And once again, everybody's listening, the book is called Is This Legal? The Inside Story of the First UFC from the man who created it. And we have Amazon links available all over this website, so definitely pick it up. I can't give this enough recommendations. It's a great book. And Mr. Davie, thank you very much for finally writing this book.
Thanks, Matthew.